My name is Marcus. I'm 25, and I live in a quiet suburb just a stone's throw from Indianapolis. For as long as I can remember, I've had a passion for creating things on a screen. While most of my friends pursued degrees in business or medicine, I dedicated myself to graphic design, spending 5 years saving up what I could from freelance gigs while learning every program and technique imaginable. My ultimate goal was to launch my own design studio. A few months ago, I finally took a small step, incorporating my business, but it was still just a dream. My reality was a soul-crushing corporate job designing mind-numbingly dull marketing materials. My setup was nothing special yet. I had a powerful but aging desktop computer I'd built myself, a second-hand drawing tablet, and a subscription to the cheapest tier of design software. But it all worked. That was what I needed to keep the dream alive. I called my fledgling company Pivot Creative, and I even designed a sleek logo for it that lived only on my hard drive. At first, my only clients were my aunt, who needed a flyer for her bake sale, and a couple of friends with passion projects. I wasn't earning a living from it, not even close. I did most of the work for free or for whatever they could offer. I understood that I had to build a portfolio, a reputation. I constantly told myself, treat every project like it's for a Fortune 500 company. That's how you get seen. One Tuesday afternoon, I was slumped at my cubicle, staring at a spreadsheet and wondering if I'd ever get a client who would actually pay my rates. My phone vibrated with a text. It was my best friend, David. Got a blind date for you Friday. She's perfect. Don't say no. I rolled my eyes. Not again, man, I texted back. A moment later, my phone rang. It was him. Listen, David's energetic voice boomed through the receiver. I know you're tired of the apps, but this one is different. Her name is Chloe. She's smart, funny, and beautiful. You just have to trust me. I sighed, leaning back in my squeaky office chair. What's the catch? Last time you said that, the girl spent an hour talking about her crystal collection. David laughed. No catch. Okay, one thing. She can be a little reserved at first. You just have to be patient with her. Give her a real chance to open up. Can you do that? I hesitated. I don't know, man. Come on, Marcus. It's just coffee. What have you got to lose? I stared at the phone for a second after we hung up. He'd given me the time and place. It was a setup, but it was also the first spark of something different I'd felt in a long time. That Friday evening, I dressed in my best smart casual outfit and drove to the coffee shop downtown. My heart was thumping a nervous rhythm against my ribs as I pulled up to the place. It was a cozy, well-regarded spot in a quieter part of the city. Tasteful, but not pretentious. The kind of place where conversations happened in low murmurs over artisanal lattes. As I stepped out of my car, I took a deep breath and gave myself a pep talk. Just be yourself. Be cool. I walked inside, the warm scent of roasted coffee beans and baked goods washing over me. I scanned the room and saw her. She matched David's description perfectly. Sitting at a small table in the corner with shoulder-length blonde hair and a thoughtful expression on her face as she looked out the window. I remember that first impression vividly. She looked to be around my age, maybe a year or two younger, dressed in a simple but elegant sweater that suggested she had a refined sense of style. Her face was clear of heavy makeup, highlighting a natural beauty. I walked over, my hands feeling a little clammy. Chloe, I asked. She looked up and her blue eyes met mine. A warm, genuine smile spread across her face. She nodded. Hi, I'm Marcus, I said, extending my hand. She reached out and shook it, her grip gentle but firm. Then, instead of speaking, she reached into her purse and pulled out a small, leather-bound notepad and a pen. My brow furrowed in confusion for a split second before she quickly wrote something down and turned the pad toward me. In neat, elegant cursive, it read, Hi, Marcus. It's so nice to meet you." I stared at the words, then back at her smiling face. The reality of the situation hit me like a physical blow. She was mute. I felt a surge of heat rise in my chest, a mix of shock, confusion, and a hot flash of anger directed squarely at David. He hadn't just omitted a detail, he had set me up for a test. My immediate instinct was to make an excuse, to turn around and walk right out the door. I could feel the eyes of other patrons on us, and a wave of self-consciousness washed over me. I looked at her and I saw the hopeful light in her eyes flicker, replaced by a familiar look of apprehension. It was a look that said she had seen this reaction before, that she was bracing herself for the inevitable polite retreat. In that moment, I remembered David's voice on the phone. "You just have to be patient with her." I took a deep breath, the anger at my friend subsiding into a complicated knot of feelings. I made a decision. I pulled out the chair opposite her and sat down. "It's nice to meet you too, Chloe," I said, making sure to keep my voice even and warm. Her shoulders relaxed just slightly, and the hopeful light returned to her eyes. She gave me another small, grateful smile. I had stayed. My blind date had just begun, and it was already the most unusual one of my life. The first few minutes were undeniably awkward. I went to the counter and ordered us both coffees, feeling a strange sense of disconnect. I was used to the easy back and forth of first date chatter, the verbal dance of getting to know someone. This was entirely different. It was quiet, deliberate. I would ask a question and then there would be a pause, filled only by the soft scratch of her pen on paper. I'd read her response, process it, and then formulate my next question. The rhythm was halting, and I found myself struggling to keep a natural flow. "So, David tells me you're really creative, I started, trying to find common ground. She nodded enthusiastically, her eyes lighting up. She began to write, her hand moving quickly across the page. "I'm a painter," she wrote, "mostly landscapes. What kind of design do you do?" I told her about my corporate gig and my dream of starting my own studio. I watched her face as I spoke, noticing the way she listened with her entire being. Her focus was absolute, her gaze never wavering. It was more attention than I'd received from people who could speak. I realized I needed to adjust my approach. I started asking simpler questions, things she could answer with a nod or a shake of her head, just to build some momentum. But I quickly found that she preferred to write, to give full and thoughtful answers. I saw the nuances in her handwriting, sometimes bold and confident, other times more delicate and hesitant. We talked about our work, our families, our favorite spots in Indianapolis. She had a dry wit that came through perfectly in her writing. At one point, I made a bad joke about corporate art and she actually laughed. A silent, beautiful shake of her shoulders, her eyes crinkling at the corners. The soundless laugh was more charming than any audible one I'd ever heard. I found myself becoming genuinely fascinated not by her silence, but by the richness of her communication. As we grew more comfortable, I gently steered the conversation to something more personal. How have dates like this gone for you in the past?" I asked, trying to phrase it as delicately as possible. She paused, the pen hovering over the paper for a long moment. I instantly regretted asking, worried I had crossed a line. But then she began to write, slowly and carefully. She turned the notepad to me. "Honestly, this is usually the part where they get a sudden emergency text and have to leave." My heart sank. I could only imagine the courage it took for her to walk into a situation like this time and time again, knowing that rejection was a strong possibility. I looked at her, at the quiet strength in her posture and the vulnerability in her eyes, and felt a profound sense of admiration. "Well, my phone is off," I said softly, "and I'm not going anywhere." The coffee shop began to empty out as the evening wore on. The baristas started wiping down counters, a clear sign that they were closing soon. The date had lasted nearly 2 hours, far longer than I would have ever predicted. I didn't want it to end. "Hey," I said, an idea forming. "It's a nice night. Would you want to take a walk? There's a park just a few blocks from here." Her face broke into a brilliant, radiant smile, and she nodded so enthusiastically it made me laugh. We left the coffee shop and walked into the cool night air. The pressure of the question and answer format was gone, replaced by a comfortable companionship. We walked side by side through the quiet park, the city lights glowing in the distance. She would gently touch my arm and point out a constellation in the sky or a beautifully lit fountain. I found myself filling the silence naturally, telling her stories about growing up, about my ridiculous college roommate, about the frustrations and hopes I had for my design business. I felt more seen and heard by this silent woman than I had by anyone in a very long time. I walked her back to her car, which was parked on a nearby street. As she unlocked her door, she paused and took out her notepad one last time. Under the soft glow of a streetlight, she wrote, "Thank you for staying." The simple words carried so much weight. They weren't just about the date. They were about seeing past the surface, about giving her a chance when so many others hadn't. "I had a really wonderful time, Chloe," I said, my voice filled with a sincerity that surprised even me. "I'd really like to see you again, if you'd like that." She beamed, a look of pure, unadulterated joy on her face. She nodded vigorously before quickly jotting down her phone number and handing me the slip of paper. As I drove home that night, my mind was a whirlwind of emotions. I was still annoyed at David for his deception, but that feeling was overshadowed by a powerful, unexpected connection to the woman I had just met. Something told me this was the start of something significant. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a call from David. I let it go to voicemail, not ready to talk to him yet. A few minutes later, a text came through. "So?" I stared at the screen, a mix of emotions bubbling up. I decided to call him. "Why didn't you tell me, Carlton?" I asked, my voice tight with frustration. "You ambushed me, man." "Would you have gone if I had?" David asked calmly. I paused. The honest answer was no. I would have made an excuse. I would have let my own preconceived notions and fear of awkwardness get in the way. "I knew you'd see how amazing she is if you just gave it a chance," he continued. "I know you, Marcus. You're a good dude. I knew you wouldn't just walk out. Chloe is one of my wife's oldest friends. She's one of the best people I know, and she deserves a guy who can see past the obvious." My anger began to dissipate, replaced by a grudging understanding of his manipulative but well-intentioned logic. "It was still a messed up way to do it," I said, but the heat was gone from my voice. "Yeah, maybe," he admitted. "But did you have a good time?" I thought about her silent laugh, her intelligent eyes, the weight of her final note. "Yeah, man," I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. "I really did." I texted Chloe later that day and we made plans for a second date. I suggested the Indianapolis Museum of Art. It seemed perfect, a place where quiet contemplation was the norm, where the art could be the focus of our attention, taking the pressure off constant conversation. When I met her there that Saturday, she looked even more beautiful than I remembered. The museum was even better than the coffee shop. We developed a quiet rhythm, a nonverbal shorthand. She would point to a piece of art, raise an eyebrow and a question, and I would offer my interpretation. Then she would pull out her phone and type a long, insightful note about the artist's use of color or composition, revealing a deep knowledge and passion for art. Her notepad was still with her, but it felt less like a necessity and more like a supplement to a conversation that was already happening through shared glances, smiles, and gestures. In a quiet gallery filled with modern sculptures, she opened up more. She told me through a series of notes on her phone about how she had lost her voice. It was due to a rare neurological condition that had developed in her late teens. It hadn't been an accident or an illness from childhood, but a slow, frustrating fading of her ability to speak. She wrote about the anger and isolation she felt at first, and the long journey to accept her new reality and find other ways to express herself. Her story was not one of tragedy, but of incredible resilience. I found myself opening up in return, telling her things I hadn't even fully admitted to myself. I told her about how trapped I felt in my corporate job, how I felt like my own creative voice was being silenced every day I went to work. I pulled out my phone and showed her some of my personal design projects, logos, branding concepts, things I worked on late at night when I was feeling inspired. She looked through them with intense focus, her brow furrowed in concentration. We sat down on a polished wooden bench in a sunlit atrium. I was talking about my fear of leaving the security of my job to go freelance, the fear of failing and having to crawl back. She listened, her gaze unwavering, her expression full of empathy. When I finished, she didn't offer a simple platitude. She took out her notepad and wrote for a full minute, her pen moving with a fierce certainty. She turned the pad to me. "The work you just showed me is powerful," it read. "You have a real voice in your design. You shouldn't let fear keep your voice quiet, too." The last two words hit me with the force of a tidal wave. The parallel she drew between her physical silence and my creative silence was so profound, so deeply understanding that I felt a lump form in my throat. It was one of the most supportive and insightful things anyone had ever said to me. It wasn't an investment offer of money, but an investment of belief. In that quiet museum, surrounded by the works of artists who had dared to be bold, I felt a shift inside me. Her words echoed in my mind for days. You shouldn't let fear keep your voice quiet, too. I thought about the immense courage it took for Chloe to navigate the world every single day, to form connections, to express her brilliant mind without the tool most of us take for granted. Her bravery put my own fears into stark perspective. What was I so afraid of? A smaller paycheck? The judgment of others? My anxieties seemed trivial compared to the mountains she had already climbed. That week, I started working. I spent every evening after my day job not just dreaming, but planning. I fleshed out the business plan for Pivot Creative. I built a professional online portfolio, polished my resume, and started reaching out to my small network, letting them know I was preparing to take on freelance clients. Chloe's perspective had been the catalyst I desperately needed. She had given me permission to believe in my own voice. I accepted her perspective completely, and in doing so, I felt like I was finally starting to accept myself. Our relationship, meanwhile, was blossoming. We went on more dates, walks along the canal, picnics in the park, even a silent film festival that we both found hilarious. Our communication became a unique language all its own. I learned to read the subtle shift in her eyes, the slight downturn of her lips, the way she tapped her fingers when she was excited about an idea. We texted constantly, our conversations flowing freely through our phones. The notepad was still there for moments that required more depth or nuance, but our connection had grown far beyond it. She became my confidant, my muse, and my biggest supporter. Her belief in me was unwavering, a quiet, steady force that made me feel like I could actually achieve the things I had only ever dreamed of. The following weeks turned into a new, exciting pattern. Our relationship deepened into something solid and beautiful. I met her circle of friends, a warm and inclusive group who had long been fluent in communicating with her and welcomed me without a second thought. She met David and his wife for dinner, and David was so visibly relieved and happy that we had connected that I finally truly forgave him for his initial deception. The four of us had a wonderful time, with Chloe typing witty remarks on her phone and passing it around the table. Inspired and emboldened by her faith in me, I took the biggest leap of my life. I walked into my boss's office, gave my 2 weeks' notice, and left my soul-crushing corporate job behind. The first month of freelancing was terrifying. The initial trickle of work from friends and family slowed, and I was faced with the harsh reality of building a client base from scratch. There were days filled with doubt where I'd stare at my silent inbox and wonder if I had made a colossal mistake. Through it all, Chloe was my rock. She would come over to my apartment, which now doubled as my office, and just sit with me while I worked. She'd review my design proposals, offering insightful critiques in her notepad. She would celebrate every small victory with me. The first time a stranger contacted me through my website, the first check that was larger than $100, her quiet, constant presence was the anchor that kept me from drifting into despair. Her strength became my own. Slowly but surely, things began to turn around. One of my initial clients, a small tech startup, loved my work so much they recommended me to 2 other companies. Word of mouth began to spread. My portfolio grew stronger with each project, and my confidence grew with it. I was no longer just a guy with a dream. I was a business owner, a creative professional, making his own way. I was happier and more fulfilled than I had ever been in my life, and I knew without a shadow of a doubt that I couldn't have done it without her. A year to the day after our first awkward meeting, I took her back to the same coffee shop. It was a chilly Friday evening, and the place was just as cozy as we remembered. We sat at the same corner table, a comfortable silence settling between us. Our communication was effortless now, a seamless blend of shared glances, small gestures, and quick texts on our phones. The little leather notepad sat on the table between us, more a symbol of our beginning than a necessity. I found myself telling her yet again how much she had changed my life, how her belief in me had unlocked a part of myself I had kept hidden for years. She listened, her eyes shining with love and pride. She reached for the notepad, a gesture she now reserved for moments of true significance. She wrote a single sentence and turned it around for me to see. "You're the first one who didn't leave." The words struck me with the same emotional force as they had a year prior, but this time they were imbued with the weight of everything we had built together. I thought of all the men who had likely sat where I was sitting, who had seen her silence as a problem, a barrier, or an inconvenience, and had walked away. I reached across the table and took her hand, intertwining my fingers with hers. "Leaving," I said, my voice thick with emotion, never even crossed my mind. As I looked at her beautiful, smiling face, I realized that the greatest trick David ever played was not on me, but on my own limitations. He had forced me into a situation I thought I didn't want, which led me to the most honest and profound connection of my life. Some stories aren't about grand, dramatic declarations. Sometimes the most important voice you can hear is the one that encourages you to find your own. And sometimes the love you're searching for isn't found in what is said, but in the simple, profound courage of someone who chooses to stay.